Hello and welcome to the Japan Archives, a podcast where we'll be delving into the histories and mythologies from Japan's long history. I'm your host, Thomas.
And I'm your co-host, Heather. We'll also be reading a poem for you every week and giving a little history about the poet who wrote it. Ikimashou!
Okay, so we're recording. How are you doing?
I am doing pretty good. How was the typhoon?
It wasn't as bad as we thought it would be, which was good. But now we're getting a lot of rain today from another one, but it's not going to hit us, so it's okay. But the river in front of my house is pretty damn high.
Oh,
but
no.
I think I'm okay.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I should be okay. The rain stopped for now. So this week, I want to look into a few of the stories surrounding human sacrifice in Japan.
Okay. Well, don't know anything about human sacrifice in Japan. I didn't know that was an actual topic. So I am really interested in what you are going to share with me, and a little frightened, but I'm ready.
So it's just a few tales about it. But archaeologically speaking, the act of human sacrifice has never been proven in Japan. They have no evidence that it actually carried out. So I feel that most of these stories which relate to it are just old stories which people believed once existed. But yeah, we have no factual proof that human sacrifice ever occurred in Japan. But we do know it was carried out in other Asian countries on the mainland, for instance in China. So maybe it was just an idea that came over and people began to believe that that's also something they'd once done in Japan. The first theme around human sacrifice I wanted to do was about the bow and arrow. In times long past, there was the belief that the bow could possess supernatural powers, and at times it was said that one would suddenly appear on the roof of different people's homes, showing them that a human sacrifice had to be made. Now, the sacrifice in question had to be a specific person from the household. It had to be the eldest unmarried daughter. But over time, the bow has changed symbolically, and it's now seen as a symbol of security instead of human sacrifice. However, during these times, the girl of the family would be taken from her home and buried alive so that the god of the wild beasts could consume the sacrifice. The basic reason behind this was that so the family would be blessed with good hunting.
So,
What?
well, I was going to say, to be honest, I think I'd rather become vegetarian than sacrifice my child for good hunting. Just eat rice and vegetables, and I think that's a better balance.
I think that's a good choice to make. Yeah.
Yeah.
So moving on from this, there is another form of human sacrifice that was carried out, and that was often it was noted when someone of a higher rank should die or pass on. A number of people, so their retainers at the time, would be buried in a circle surrounding the grave of the deceased, and they would be buried up to their heads so that their heads would stay exposed. And this was basically to allow these people to mourn and wail for the deceased until a time when they eventually died from dehydration or starvation, or that when wild animals came and basically ate them alive. Now, the records of this say that the practices were eventually ended during the reign of Suinin, who was the 11th emperor of Japan. So it was a very ancient practice that was also stopped very early in the line of emperors in Japan.
So is this a verified account or is this conjecture? Because I know you mentioned in your introduction that there wasn't substantiated information, but this account, how is this one?
This account, we have references of it in the Nihongi, so the National Chronicles of Japan, which talk about the age of the gods as well as the first emperors of Japan. So again, a text which is very much made up, mythical in a lot of ways in its writing. It's based off writing which may or may not have been true, because like we said, we found no actual evidence of this. But as well, we have other documents mentioning this practice, and one of them goes as follows. So the document states that on the 25th day of the 6th month in year 781, a petition was addressed to the reigning emperor at the time, the Emperor Kamu. The petition was brought to him by a member of the Haji family. Now, this family, known in Japanese as the Haji Bei, came to him asking for permission to change their family name from Haji to Sugawara, which was the place that the family now dwelt.
Oh.
Now, according to the petition, which was brought by a man known as Haji no Sukune Furuhito, in days long past, the practice of human sacrifice was still undertaken, with the retainers of high-ranking nobles buried alongside them, as we've already stated earlier. Now, the event that this person specifically cites was the death of Empress Hibasuhime. Now, upon her death, it was asked what should be done, and many at the time in the palace, in the government, cited to continue the old practices and to have people buried alive alongside her. However, a man known as Nomi no Sukune is said to have spoken up. Now, Nomi was the ancestor of the Haji Bey and stated the following: "It is my humble opinion that the practice of burying retainers alive is absolutely contrary to the principles of the benevolent government and is not the way of developing the nation and befitting the people." And so Nomi took with him 300 potters and crafted clay into different images of people and things, which he then presented to the Emperor Sunin, which is when this story is set. Now, the Emperor, upon seeing these creations, was very pleased and used them to replace the burying of living people as sacrifice. And the Emperor dubbed these figurines Haniwa, which you can see a lot of the time in the different museums around Japan, the little human figurines made of clay. Now, this is the story of the origin of those items, and going back to the whole, they wanted to change their name from Haji to Sugawara. Now, in ancient times, the Haji Bey, you could translate that in as like the clan of clay workers. So by the time they made this petition, the family had moved away from such acts. They no longer were involved in the burial practices, which is why they wanted to give up their own ancient name of Haji, so clay workers, and change it to Sugawara.
Regarding the clay figurines and the clay models, yes, I have seen, as soon as you mentioned that, I was like, oh, wait, we've seen that. I think, wasn't there some at the Edo Museum, and then I've seen at the Japanese History Museum in Ueno
Yes.
Park.
So yes, according to this is the ancient origins of such figurines. They were designed as a replacement for human sacrifice.
I think I like them much better now. I liked them before, but now, oh, that's really, I'm glad. Good choice there. Allegedly replaced.
Allegedly. I mean, archaeologically, we have evidence of them. Their origins date back to a lot earlier than the reign of Suinin, but of course, it's a very nice story linked to the origins of these items. So yeah, that's what I found out when researching into some aspects of human sacrifice in Japan. Now, I have one more story to tell you about human sacrifice. This is more of a folk tale, actually, which I stumbled across by accident today in one of my random books. And I read it. I thought it was quite interesting. This folk tale, I'm not quite sure of the name in Japanese, so I am going to call it The Gods of Mimisawa. So the story goes that the gods of Mimisawa were a snake and a monkey. These gods went by the names of Koya and Chusan. Every year they would receive a sacrifice in the form of a pretty girl with long hair and fine white skin. Now a new year came around and so a girl was chosen. She spent her days in mourning for her future death until one day a hunter appeared at her door. He was a large and strong man, and learning of her sad fate, he wished to know what she could have possibly have done in a previous life to avert such a horrible end in this current life. Now the hunter, he approached her mother and father, who were equally sad that it was their daughter who was to die, and the hunter said to them that it would probably be best for him to kill her so that he may give her a quick and easy death instead of a death where she would suffer at the hands of these two gods. And the parents agreed to this. So the hunter approaches the girl, preparing to kill her himself, but upon seeing her lovely face, he instantly falls in love with her, and so a new plan forms in his mind. So part of his plan was as followed. He told the parents of the girl to stretch a long rope around their home, like a sacred rope that you often see tied around trees in Shinto shrines, for example. And basically this was so they could tell everyone to stay away from their home so they didn't have to accept guests, because over the next few days they wanted to purify their house and their daughter for the upcoming ceremony, so she was pure and ready. The hunter spent these days sharpening his several blades, as well as spending time in the house with his dogs who he had brought with him. Now, these dogs of his he had trained to hunt and kill monkeys because, as the story says, dogs and monkeys are well known to naturally have a hatred towards each other. In addition to this, he spent a lot of hours with the girl who he had now fallen in love with. He told her how he was sad that he had fallen in love with someone he was now going to give his life for, because that was his plan. The new plan was he would sacrifice himself in her stead, and she was very grateful for this. Eventually the day of the sacrifice came around, and the priest appeared at her parents' door with a box tied in cord, and as per tradition, every year a girl would then climb into the box would then be sealed and taken to the nearby shrine where the gods lived. Now this year was very different. The hunter instead climbs into the box. He carefully places his blades around him in the box, and his two dogs climb inside as well before the mother and the father and the daughter seal the box and hand it back to the priests. The priests take the box and they reach the shrine, and opening the sanctuary doors, they place the box inside as an offering and they leave. During this time, the hunter had managed to carve a spy hole into the box so he could have a look at the gods who were going to take his life. Now, the god inside the shrine was a giant monkey. He was 8 feet tall with a red face and long glossy white fur. The monkey god was surrounded by 200 other monkeys, and in front of the god was a giant carving board and knife laid out before him. So the giant monkey, he stands and he approaches the box, he undoes the lid and opens it, ready to take his sacrifice. As soon as the lid is opened, the hunter jumps forth from the box and he orders his dogs to attack. They grapple with the god, the hunter leaping towards the god, forcing him onto the cutting board, the hunter placing his sword against the throat of the monkey god. He screams at the god saying, "What do you get for killing and eating people? Listen to me. I'm going to cut off your head and feed it to my dogs. All these years you've been eating women and leaving people childless. Now your head comes off." All the while the dogs had chased his monkeys into the nearby trees, who were now screaming so frantically in horror the mountains rang with the sound. The sound so strong, people thought the mountains would shatter. So the monkey god in fear possesses one of the nearby priests and begs for his life. "The practice must stop," the god wailed. "I have learned not to kill humans. Priests, don't harm the man who came to punish me. Leave the family who was supposed to make an offering alone. From now on, I shall protect them and their descendants. Priests, beg this man for my life. I am the one who is in danger." So the priests came running and made promises that their god had learnt his lesson, that he would no longer accept human sacrifices. And so the hunter, believing him, he took the sword away from the god's throat. And from then on it said that the practice stopped. The god honored his promise, and only boar and deer were served as offerings. The hunter and the girl he later married lived happily ever after and was safe from the monkey god.
It's a happy ending. It's a happy ending story.
The god held his promise, the god protected them forever onwards, and the village no longer had to sacrifice any more young girls every year. Now, the only thing I will say about this story, which I didn't understand, was the beginning of the story says there's two gods, a snake and a monkey. However, the snake never appears in the story after being mentioned. Like, we only see the monkey god. So where the snake god is in this story, I am not quite sure. Whether they forgot they'd mentioned him at the start, I'm not sure.
Or it's winter and the snake was hibernating. There's an explanation.
It's possible. I'm just wondering then if one god relented to not accept human sacrifices anymore. Obviously the snake wasn't there for this change of heart, so the snake might not necessarily agree to this change because he's not in the story at all. It's just it's very odd that the story starts by saying there are two gods who accept human sacrifice and then one is never mentioned again. But there you go. I thought it was a very interesting story.
Maybe the snake is in a different location, another prefecture.
From what I read from the story, they both resided in the same area, the area of Mimisawa. But maybe, like you said, Mimisawa might have been a large area and they both lived in different parts. I'm not too sure. But yeah, I found that story. I thought it was very interesting. I didn't think I would find a folk tale about human sacrifice, but there you go.
Yeah, I'm quite excited to have a happy ending story. And yeah, I've never heard that folktale before. And yeah, it was really interesting. Thanks for finding that. It's just a lucky find, and I'm glad to have heard it.
So yeah, there are a few bits that I found about human sacrifice that I wanted to tell you about. So what did you think?
Well, to be honest, when you said you were doing human sacrifice, I was a little worried.
Okay.
But I'm quite relieved to know that it's possibly just conjecture. And I'm glad that if there was that practice previously, that it was stopped several Jedi ago. So much more interesting and less gory than I was really expecting.
Yes, which I'm happy about. I didn't really want to talk about gory things, so it was nice to find out that it was more flights of fancy.
I definitely hope that it is more of the flights of fancy.
So, yeah, that's my part done for today. So, is the poem you picked today somehow themed along this line?
Why, Thomas, yes it is. Although to be fair, we talked, because we've been trying to connect for a while, but because of the typhoons, we've had some interruptions.
Yes.
And it's been a little difficult with no electricity or possible no electricity. So we talked about this topic. So I knew it was coming. And I found a poem. I found this topic out previously when I was doing research for other poems, and it's one I wanted to explore. I have a jisei, or death poem. So along with our topic of human sacrifice, I have death poem.
Okay.
I am just starting my research into this topic, so today is just a short introduction, and I want to explore this topic at a later date, and I'm going to put a request out for anyone who is listening. If you know about jisei, please feel free to share your knowledge with me. I know there are some books in English, but honestly not a lot about the jisei. So there's a little information that I can find, but again, if you know, please share it with me. Now, jisei are usually written close to a person's death. They can be reflections on the nature of death and may not explicitly refer to death. The poems are also brief, which could be said to parallel the shortness of life itself. Now, there are different styles of the poems. There are waka, and tanka is a type of waka.
Okay.
The poems are usually somber in tone, but since, again, I knew the topic you were going to speak about, and I was going to assume that it was going to be gory, I wanted to make things a little bit more light and share a jisei by the poet Moriya Sen'an. I don't have so much information about him, but as fitting the topic of jisei, or death poem, he died in 1838.
Okay, so we're quite into the modern history for this poet. Okay.
And you will understand after I read the translation why I wanted to make things a little bit lighter. Okay.
Okay.
Ware shinaba, sakaya no kame no, shita no ike yo, moshi ya shizuku no, Moriya Sen'an. The translation is, bury me when I die beneath a wine barrel in a tavern. With luck, the cask will leak.
So basically, he's asking that even though he's deceased and passed on, he's still going to be craving wine even in the afterlife. So he's desperate for that cask to spring a leak over his dead body.
If he's lucky. So if he's unlucky, the cask won't leak. So it's a waiting and hoping, very hopeful poem, I guess.
It's very interesting for you to read a poem which, I think this is the first poem we've done which has actual humor in it. Like all the others are quite stoic and factual or lamenting. It's quite cool to hear something different. And the fact that he's making a joke about his own death is quite nice in a way.
You know, the interesting thing is, you know, we've just started scratching the surface of studying poetry, but there are so many examples of like humorous poems, and is it ribald or ribald? I'm not sure about the pronunciation. You know, slightly inappropriate in tone poems. There's a whole other world that we haven't started to explore, so I'm glad not only did I open up the topic of jisei, I also now I want to open up the topic of humorous poems as well. And I agree with you, because usually my impression is that a lot of the poems, yes, are more serious and somber, and nature and the loneliness of being alone and the loneliness of solitude and those kind of high-minded topics. But sometimes people are humorous and creative, and sometimes take a serious topic and turn it on its ear.
Exactly.
Thank goodness.
It's always nice to find the more humorous and relaxed parts of history because they're just as interesting. So I'm glad you found that poem, because as soon as you said death poem, I thought it would be quite serious and somber, but it was the complete opposite to what I expected.
Oh, I love that so very much. I do have a challenge for you. When I read the poem, did you notice anything interesting about the last line?
So he puts his own name in the poem.
The last line's a play on his words. Yes.
So his name is Moriya Sen'an, but in the meaning of the poem, what did that line read again?
Well, the translation is "the cask will leak." I have to verify the actual translation for that from the professor.
But in a way, he's using his own name as the joke in the poem.
Yes, I believe so.
Oh,
Yes.
that's pretty cool.
So I really don't have much information about him, but just based on his poem, I think I might like
Yeah,
him.
he sounds
so.
like he was an interesting guy.
This poem, this whole episode, I was so expecting it to go a totally different direction, and we went the opposite way.
Which isn't bad. It's not a bad thing.
I honestly, I like to turn expectations sometimes.
Yeah.
So turn expectations
Change
the right phrase.
expectations, no?
Maybe change expectations. Yeah, sometimes changing expectations is fun.
Well, Heather, thank you for that poem. It's not what I expected at all, so I'm happy about that.
You are so very welcome. And thank you for, I don't know if saying thank you for the topic of human sacrifice sounds quite appropriate, but thank you for an interesting and informative topic along with a story with
you're very welcome.
Pleasant ending.
But yeah, as usual, that's everything from me. Do you have anything more to say before we sign off?
I do not. I think I'm good for today.
Okay. Well, as usual, thanks everyone for tuning in. We're very grateful that you keep coming back every week to listen.
Yes, thank you so much.
So until next week, matane.
Hi, matane.
If you've enjoyed the Japan Archives, please consider checking out historyofjapan.co.uk, a database we are making on Japanese history. You can also find the show notes for all our episodes here. If you're on Instagram, you can follow my account over at nexus_travels, that's NEXUS_travels.
We also have a Facebook and Twitter page, which you can find at Japan Archives. If you're interested in little slices of life in Japan, be sure to check out my website over at heatheroveryonder.com. Thank you for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed the episode. And if you have any suggestions for future episodes, have anything you'd love to hear about, head on over to historyofjapan.co.uk and send us a message.
If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to give us a rating and review over on iTunes. Thank you again for listening, guys. Until next time, bye.
Matane!